This is The Current. I'm Clive Priddle, and I'm joined today by Mychal Denzel Smith. Hi, Mychal.
Hey, Clive.
Now, Mychal is the author of two wonderful books. Invisible Man, Got the Whole World Watching, and brand new out this week as we're speaking, Stakes is High. You know, Mychal, I was thinking about your two books, and it seems to me that the first book was in some ways what you feel like as a young man in America. And then the second book, in some ways, it feels to me like you flipped it, and that this is what America feels like to you. The gaze, if you like, has gone out. And your subtitle for Stakes is High is Life After the American Dream. So it feels like you're in a kind of fairly tough place in terms of how you see the country right now. Would you like to just talk about the journey between the two books for a little bit?
Yeah, that's a completely accurate way of describing what happened. It's sort of the first book is an examination of my own life and identity up to that point, and encompassing a lot of different things outside of myself, but like the reception of those things and the consumption of them and how they affect how I saw myself operating in the world, right? And this new book is born out of that moment happening and like completing that first book. And yeah, I wrote that book. I finished, and it was released. I was 29, and I turned 30 that year. And I had this moment upon turning 30 where it's just like, I don't know what's next, because I hadn't planned for that. And there was like a lot of examination of that in the first book, just being like, look, I don't know what it is to be a young Black man so much, because I've never conceived of a future in which I could be a young Black man. I didn't recognize that this was a possibility. And then looking at the forces which taught me like what that meant or why that was. And so I'm at this point at the release of the first book where now I'm entering into this future, or this future that I had no plans on, no designs for, no aspirations toward. So the first couple years of that is sort of like trying to understand, okay, what do I want this life to mean? But that coincides with, 2 days after I turned 30 was the election of 2016, in which Donald Trump becomes president. And so there's, what do I want my life to be? Also, the world is ending, right? Like that feeling that I'm now in a position of trying to chart a future that seems less certain, not by virtue of like my own sort of understanding of myself and my identity, but like the factors of that are outside of me that have to do with the creeping and now very present authoritarianism and climate change and all of these things that just seem so big. And so this book, Stakes is High, is sort of wrestling with those two positions. I need to I want to live a life that's past 30. I want to conceive of an entire life, but it feels almost impossible to do as everything is crumbling around me. And so this is me saying, so how do we scramble right now when we don't have much time? What can we do to make sure that future is possible? And it is possible. It's just that we've been acting in ways that exacerbate the problem. And if we were working in different ways and we were trying to actually come up with solutions or act on present solutions, we could be charting that future. And then the question becomes, so why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we just listening to our better selves? Why are we giving into everything that is destructive? And, my intervention in that question is, with this book, as you point to Life After the American Dream, is to say that, we've simply just allowed the lies about ourselves in this country to determine our present and in our future. We've allowed ourselves we've become so enamored with the delusion of who we are, as opposed to the truth of us and our history and what our systems have wrought, what it means to be American, what's wrapped up in that American identity. We're so consumed with those things, so enamored, so in love with what we think of ourselves as opposed to what we actually are. And that means that we act in ways that are detrimental toward our future. And so this is me saying, look, if we could just break free of that, if we could break free of these definitions that we have of the American identity that have an impact globally, obviously, but if we could break ourselves free of that, we can begin the process. None of this by any means is, the ultimate landing point. But it is to say, look, a starting point for us is to break free of the narrative that we've committed ourselves to that hasn't served or has served a very small slice of the population, and is destroying so many others.
So I want to ask you, and the book is about America, and I think somewhere else you've written about sort of the core character of America. I think that's what's so wonderful about the book, and it's a fabulous book. It's short, it's incredibly punchy, it's got a lot of sharp edges. But you just mentioned 2016 as being kind of the hinge between the two books in some ways. And I wondered if, in a funny kind of way, you as a writer felt, I won't say exactly liberated, but felt galvanized by the challenge posed by 2016 to write, and to write in the way that you have in this book. Or perhaps, the other question is whether the Obama years were kind of confusing, because did we think we were making more progress generally than we were in that time?
I think we did. I think we so much of it had hinged on the idea that Obama, in and of himself, represented a jump in progress that, transported us to a hopeful future, that we all were just on the right path somehow, right? But we move slow on so many things. And I'm not even talking about, just the biggest thing for me is just look, we are facing climate apocalypse, right? We see it right now in front of our faces. It's not playing around. And, we can't even handle, in this country at least, and in several other countries that have rather authoritarian leaders, I should say, that we can't even handle this pandemic, which seems like the easy one, right? It's not even the hard thing that we're going to face. And so I say that to say we moved slow on so many things during the Obama years, believing that in Obama himself, there was so much progress that had been accomplished that we weren't paying attention to things that actually needed radical transformative action immediately. And so then you have the inevitable backlash to the first black president, right? Donald Trump's inevitable in this sense, if you look at American history. And then you see the retrenchment of all of these ideologies that have been destructive, and the acceleration of all of the problems during just 4 years. And now we're scrambling. Now we're just what can we do? What can we do? And we're running and trying to figure it out. And it's just well, we've waited too long. We've waited so long. And so the first part of what you asked was I galvanized as a writer? It's no, I was scared, right? I was just frightened of what was to come. And I honestly, I didn't want to deal with it. I was so seized up with fear that this book is not the first book that I conceived of post Invisible Man got the whole world watching. I was trying to do something that felt like I didn't have to address our current climate, the current politics. But I think what did hit me eventually was while working on the proposal for that other book was I was running away from a responsibility, because like we have to be all hands on deck, and like here's what I can do. Now I went through lots of questioning around like how effective is me writing words, and how effective is me putting out a book? What is that going to actually do for anyone? But what I've always said, and what I still believe, is that we all contribute in our way. Like what skills do we possess? What positions do we hold? What communities are we a part of? Where can we make change? And you do it with what you have in front of you. You pick up whatever it is, whatever tools that you have, and you apply them to this struggle. And so I was determined to do that. And so I think, it wasn't an immediate sense of, well, we have a challenge facing us and I'm going to rise to this occasion. It was, retreat at first. It was fear. It was saying like, this is too big for me. But then it's saying to myself, well, this book is a small part of a larger project that we're all a part of, or those of us who want to see this change that we're a part of. And I have to make my contribution.
So you wrote your book, and you were just finishing up Stakes is High as the coronavirus started to make some of these inequalities, horribly vivid to all of us. And you touch on it very briefly. But it's been more than just the coronavirus this summer. It's been a truly wild summer. As you say, right now, California is still burning seemingly out of control, and without the federal government having done a damn thing to stop it. Mm-hmm. The Black Lives Matter protests have been greeted with violence, and it feels like the U.S. is a very uncertain place, which is not what you think of America. It doesn't. We're not an uncertain country usually. So the idea that with all this boiling around, that we could suddenly become Denmark and have a system that is more mutually caring and supporting of one another seems like a long journey indeed. Do you see any way that we can get this done?
Well, if we recognize that this summer, with everything that you mentioned, is long in the making, right? Like everything that's happened up to this point is this is the result of that. If we then say, wow, I don't want to go through that again. Right? Like that was intense. That's too much, right? If we collectively just say that was too much, this is not the life that I want to live, then we start asking different questions about how do we prevent this, right? But I think, yeah, you're right in that it's a tall order. It's a big ask of people. When you simply still believe that there's something, particularly in the U.S. Conception of our identities, that there are people that genuinely believe there's something special about being an American that inoculates them from the worst of the world, right? And some of these things are borne out just by virtue of, like, yes, the American military might and the American empire does protect you from a lot of things. This is why 9/11 was so scary to people, right? Like, we're not accustomed to those kinds of attacks happening on our soil. So it's a big, scary moment for a lot of people to experience that. But that's a reality for many people. Many people, the reality is daily bombing, right? And a lot of those are U.S. bombs. And it's like, once you put together that your protection is based on the destruction of other people, on the other people's civilization, on other people's way of being, you have to ask yourself the moral question: am I okay with that? Am I okay with the destruction of other people? And so far, the answer for the U.S. has been yes, right? So, but now you're reaping all of that, right? Like the karmic repercussions of enacting that level of violence, both abroad and at home, is right here. It's saying, look, because of the way that you have worked toward, because of the way globalization works, because of the way that capitalism works, because of the way that policing works, and all of these things, like, here it is. It's the eruption of an all-out revolutionary force during the midst of a global pandemic, right? Like, on your soil. But the response has to be more introspective than it has been. It has to be looking inward and saying, what does this say about American identity? What does it say about the way that we have acted as a country, as opposed to the pointing of the finger to say these ungrateful people, or these people who live outside of our borders, who do these weird things that we don't understand, who create these diseases, right? Like that very, like, and that gets borne out in the way that Donald Trump talks about coronavirus and calls it the China virus and all those things, and the increased levels of anti-Asian violence that cropped up right around the beginning of this, but then continue.
Okay, why do you keep calling this the Chinese virus? There are reports of dozens of incidents of bias against Chinese Americans in this country. Your own aide, Secretary Azar, says he does not use this term. He says ethnicity does not cause the virus. Why do you keep using this? A lot of people say it's
China.
Racist.
It's not racist at all. No, not at all. It comes from China. That's why. Comes from China. I want to be accurate.
It's just saying, instead of looking at the way that like global markets work and the way that travel has worked and all, like why we have all of this interaction, what the food supply does look like, and why all these illnesses are born from our interactions with animals. Like there's so many different things to examine there that have nothing to do with placing the blame on a group of people that you've deemed other. But we're not really good at doing that in this country. We're not really good at doing that. We always seek an outside force to blame, even when that, especially within the context of the domestic, we like name an other outside of what's the conception of the American identity that's sort of hegemonically seen as like white, wealthy men, and then everyone else gets an other, and everyone who then raises concern about anything else is like, you're divisive, you're trying to tear down our country, you're trying to get us away from who we are and what the fabric of this country is. Every time we do that, whether we're doing it as a collective, as a country, and pointing outside of the country, or within the country and the divisions within the country, we keep doing that. You are to blame. You are to blame. You are to blame. That doesn't recognize systems of power, right? Like it's like, yes, some people are to blame because they have perpetuated this particular system. They are beneficiaries of that system, and they've kept that system alive a lot through violence of those who critique it. When we can say that of ourselves, when we can say that to one another, then we can start on that path of saying, look, that thing is scary. This summer was scary. We can change that. We don't have to have another one of those. Or when something like that, like a pandemic of an airborne illness arises, we'll be able to act swiftly and in community with one another and be able to address it very quickly. It makes no sense that we're 6 months into this. It makes no sense. But we are, and it's by virtue of a refusal to see ourselves as in community and in relation to our fellow citizens, and not just our fellow citizens, like in the U.S. context, but just people that we have to. It sounds naive when you say it. It sounds very like childlike when you say it, but we just have to care for one another, right? And that gets it expresses itself in a number of different ways, but that's the basic. Like that's just the germinal thing that has to be here, is that we have to actually care about one another. And right now, what we've shown is like there's certain people we don't care about. There's certain people that we have deemed expendable, and operating that way just means more death, more hurting, and then more reaction from the people who are dying and hurting. Well, when people are in desperate situations, when you have deemed them expendable, what else do you expect from them?
When you talk about the need to change systems to make people care better for one another, to encourage people to care better for one another, to allow that caring impulse to be the dominant impulse as opposed to the other ones that usually get promoted, you're making an interesting parallel argument to Ibram Kendi when he talks about anti-racism, where anti-racism is not a passive act. It's like you have to be active about this. You have to be visibly doing anti-racism. You can't just sit back and say, I'm for it.
Yeah,
that isn't going to get it done. And in a sense, I hear you saying the same thing about some of the structural features of our landscape, where you're saying it's not good enough to say, I really don't like this outcome. You've got to strip it down, take it apart, build something better. And your book is I think it's a wonderful manifesto. It's short and punchy, but it's a manifesto for that, isn't it? It's
exactly that. Yeah, it's to say, look, you can be on the right side of all of the issues rhetorically, or when you're being polled, you can be on the right side of everything. But when it comes down to it, when we actually have to do these things, well, what happens is like you become a NIMBY. You say, not in my backyard, right? Like when it's like, oh, I feel for the homeless. I feel like they should have homes, but just not here, right? Or I support green energy, but I don't want those wind thingies off the coast of my vacation home, right? Like these are things that actually happen, right? Like this is genuinely things that actually happen. And it's like, well, do you stand on that or not? Do you believe in it or not? And it's if all it is for you is just cocktail party chatter, in which you like get to impress people by standing on the right side of something, or to debate someone else, or, and then you go about living your life as it's currently constituted. Well, I mean, what does that mean for you? Like, what does it mean to actually to enact those things that you're telling all of your friends about, right? Like, is it just a matter of, again, sort of an individual sense of superiority over other people? No, that's not going to cut it. Like, it has to be collective action, and it has to involve everyone, and especially those people that say that they believe in this stuff. And I think, not to get too far down into this path, but this is the frustration I think I have with the Democratic Party and the way that it always leans back into this centrism, is that they profess to believe in, or each individual prominent member of the Democratic Party says, no, I'm with you. I think that that's exactly what we need. But for right now, we can't do that, right? Like, we have to think practically. We have to think about winning elections. We have to think about winning over these people that are not on our side at all. So we have to hedge. We have to, make our message appealing to all these people. And it's like, for what? What does that accomplish if you actually believe in these things? If you actually believe that we do need universal health care, you do believe that we need the Green New Deal to address climate change. If we need that, yes, we absolutely do. But it's just not going to happen right now. And it's just like, well, stop paying lip service to it then. Either you believe it or you don't. And if you don't believe it, don't tell me that you do, because I need to identify who I'm fighting against. And if you tell me that you're on my side, don't tell me then that you don't want to actually do it. Like, you're just saying that it because it sounds like a good thing to be on the side of. Well, that's just, it serves no one. It serves no one to do that. And so, yeah, like there's so many people who profess certain ideas, and then run away from them when we're tasked with the actual implementation of those ideas.
I mean, the only thing is that maybe the center is shifting. I was just thinking about sports this year and the number of sports players who are now routinely taking a knee before games, even if some of the crowd is booing them. Not all the crowd is booing them. Some of the crowd is booing them. We know that division exists. But the fact is, 2 years ago, those players probably would have been canned by the teams. And now the teams are saying, we have to allow some form of expression for this. We have to find a different anthem sometimes. So the center there has moved a little bit.
Yeah. A little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Right. Let's not go crazy here. But it's, the degree to which that little movement has been picked up elsewhere around the world, and in sports not traditionally associated with political commentary. There's Naomi Osaka, bringing politics to tennis. I mean, I don't look for tennis for politics usually. There's British soccer players all wearing Black Lives Matter across the back of their shirts, albeit in front of no crowds, but on television. So is it possible that even if the Democratic Party is an inherently cautious organization, that by virtue of everybody else saying, you know what, folks, the center itself has moved, and if you want to be in the center, it's to the left of where you think it is, we might get a little closer to this outcome than you perhaps are suggesting?
I think, yeah, all movement is movement, right? Like, so yes, it's like it's getting us somewhere, but I guess I'm cautious in overstating like how much of that is going to be lasting, right? Right. Yes, in response to, and we have to say, like, this summer, when we say like the protest movement, Black Lives Matter, and talking about policing, the action that really got people to pay attention is the fact that someone burned a police station, right? And so what we have now is a reaction to that action and to the burning of police cars and what have you, and then things sort of calm down a bit. So we have this from years of organizing and years of saying Black Lives Matter, and then a spark comes in the burning of the police station in Minneapolis. Well, the question is, if this is the result of that, right? If the center moving to the point that it's almost flipped to where, like, if you are an athlete in a popular sport that's broadcast to millions and you are not making a statement, it says more than if you do make a statement on these things, right? So we're there at least, and we can talk about like what statements they're actually making, but like you make a statement, right? So we've gotten there from a police station burning. Right, like this. All I'm saying is, like, think about what type of action is necessary to shift the center this much, and this being just that you say that Black Lives Matter, or like you demonstrate before the game, because it's not even a protest anymore, kneeling during the anthem. It's just this demonstration now that we believe that Black Lives Matter, or what have you, right? So we're there by virtue of how many dead people at the hands of police and the burning of that police station. Like, if it takes that much to move the center, just this much, my question is just like, how lasting is that? How much of an impact is that going to have, and how much more of those dramatic actions are going to be necessary to continue moving the center? Because the center gets complacent once it's shifted. It's like, oh, we've done our duty here. Like we've established something that's different from the norm that we had before, and like that's a good unto itself. It also is to say, what's required right now is the center moving to transformative action, and we haven't gotten there. So I'm like, how many more police stations have to be burned down? Or can people get it together before more police stations burn down? And it's like, I don't know the answer to that right now, because like what I see doesn't represent in the center yet what's happening in the streets, what's being demanded from the streets. And if we can align those two, if we can get there, then there's an explosive potential. But it's to say, how much is required to get us there?
That to me is the definition of stakes is high, right there. That tension between those two things. And I think we should leave the people who listen to this interview with that thought. Let me just say, really, good luck for the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Knock 'em dead, so to speak. And thank you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Clive. Thanks so much, Charles.
Hachette,